Good morning, this is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for November 23rd around 8 a.m. We have Tropical Storm Otto in the southwest Caribbean Sea east of Nicaragua this morning. It was a hurricane overnight. The system is beginning to weaken a little bit, and the hurricane hunters are flying around there right now. This WC-130 Hercules aircraft is in there at this moment, finding pressure 995 millibars. And winds at the surface are not very strong, 41 knots, gusts to 50, 60, but not any hurricane force winds. So this has been downgraded to a tropical storm, and it'll be interesting to see if this recovers and does end up hitting as a hurricane in Nicaragua, because that is what the forecast track indicates, that this will be hitting southern Nicaragua. As we look at this morning's NASA color-enhanced satellite loop, you can tell the system has its moments and then it weakens and then there's another pulse of convection, but the system is not very well organized. In fact, on this morning's discussion from the National Hurricane Center, they indicated that there's vertical wind shear of 15 to 20 knots over the system, and this could lessen a little bit as it gets near the coast, but it's a ragged-looking system, not well organized. So this is, if it does strengthen, it's not going to be by much. So basically what we're looking at now is about what they're going to get in Nicaragua. Now as it crosses Nicaragua and gets into the Pacific, the system should weaken due to increasing vertical wind shear, and that should be the end of it. This is going to be mainly a rain event for these areas impacted. Now looking at the close-up zoomed-in map at Hurricane City on Otto, you can see that the models are in a much tighter agreement on landfall projection just south of Bluefields, Nicaragua, which is the red blinking light on the map. Now the beauty of the maps at Hurricane City is the more you zoom in, the more information that becomes available. So if we really zoom in tightly on these areas, you can get population totals. Down here, there's a town called Greytown, which is just north of the Costa Rica border, of population 1307. And in between there and Bluefields, just basically very sparsely populated until you get up toward Bluefields, where you have about a 45,547 population based on 2005 statistics. But in between, very sparsely populated. So this is going to be mainly an event for the west coast of Nicaragua, which are more highly populated areas. Actually, Bluefields, Nicaragua, the red blinking light, is the furthest south city in the database at Hurricane City, and it is the least impacted area in the entire Atlantic Basin, and they're more apt to get hit late in the season, so this is not a surprise. However, it is a surprise that they are going to have a potential hurricane impact, because this hardly ever happens in this area. It happens about once every 29 years on average, going back to 1871. That they get a direct impact from a hurricane. In fact, the last hurricane to hit there directly was back in 1996. Hurricane Caesar hit with 80-mile-per-hour winds. And the last major to hit this area was all the way back in 1988. Hurricane Joan hit with 135-mile-per-hour winds, killed 148 people in Nicaragua, and caused $1 billion in damage. That's a lot of damage from back in 1988. But luckily, hopefully this won't be that kind of a situation. This will be a flooding event for a lot of areas, but thankfully not a major hurricane. In fact, this area hardly ever gets hit by tropical storms either. You have to go all the way back to 1871. It gets hit by a tropical storm or a hurricane or brushed or whatever about once every 12 years on average. Now, if you compare that to a place like Miami, for example, that gets affected by a named storm every 2 years or so, there's quite a difference between the southern basin of the Caribbean Sea and areas in the more traditional hurricane lanes in the Atlantic Basin that get hit far more frequently. Now, this area was impacted in 2009 by Hurricane Ida, but that was well north of here near Principalca, Nicaragua, far to the north. Anyway, here is a Google Earth shot of the areas that are going to be impacted here as this system comes in. This is Greytown, the population around 1,700. But look at all these other areas along the coast, very sparsely populated. I mean, not much population at all until you get up. There's a few small towns, Punta Gorda, actually. There's a Punta Gorda, Florida as well. But very small towns right along the coast until you get up near Bluefields, Nicaragua, and that's when things get a little more populated. There's Bluefields. Here is a photo from Graytown, Nicaragua, well south of Bluefields. Notice not real good looking construction there. And a lot of these small towns are surrounded by water, so this will be a concern for potential surge flooding and for rainfall as Otto makes its way on shore. And looking at the population density map, Managua, Nicaragua, and areas surrounding are where the most heavily populated areas are, and this will be the concern as Otto moves across and dumps heavy rain over these areas. So using the HurTrack program, here is the point of landfall tomorrow around noontime with 65 knot winds, about 43 nautical miles south of Bluefields, and notice they are under the sustained tropical storm force wind field, but the core of higher winds will be in very sparsely populated areas as it moves on shore. And the probability maps from the National Hurricane Center of 39-mile-per-hour winds or greater coming in south of Bluefields, Nicaragua, and extending towards the Pacific are pretty high, around 60-70%, and this will be increasing as this closes in on the coast. Now, if you compare that to the probability of hurricane force surface winds of 74 miles per hour or greater, there's only about a 10% chance of that happening. Now, this will also increase as it approaches the coast, but with systems that are right around 75 miles an hour, especially if they're status quo or in a weakening state, a lot of times those hurricane force winds do not mix down to the surface. So there may be some gusts to hurricane force along the coast, but this is going to be, again, mainly a rain event for most of these people, and with some surge flooding on the southeast coastal areas. But the main story, I think, when this is all said and done from Otto is going to be the rainfall, especially in the western portions of. And to wrap things up, here's the front page of Hurricane City. The countdown clock is activated up here. 21 hours roughly before tropical storm force winds arrive in southern Nicaragua. That's how much time you have to get all your loose objects indoors and make any preparations you need to make. Bluefields, Nicaragua, the current feature, although it should come in south of there. There are no webcams in the area. Weather instruments are very sparsely available down here. So it's going to be basically paying attention to Twitter and local news from the affected areas. Also want to mention on November 30th at 8 p.m., that's a week from today, I will be live with my hurricane season wrap-up show. Click the link here in the upper right-hand corner. The video will open down here in the tracking map window. And I'll be live for about 2 hours talking about all the named storms that hit land this year and how my predictions did. I made city predictions, and a couple of my top 5 were impacted once again. That's like 12